All right, let's jump right in. We're about to tackle one of the most debated events in all of human history, but we're going to look at it from an angle you've probably never heard before.
So it really all boils down to this one question. Was the cross a payment to God, or was it a protest against us? I mean, think about it. The answer to that question changes, well, pretty much everything. Is this about a God who demands violence to be satisfied? Or is it about a God who willingly steps into our violence to show us just how broken it is?
Okay, so first, let's look at the theory most of us have probably heard. It often gets framed like a legal transaction. Picture this, a massive cosmic courtroom. Yeah, this idea goes way back. There was this lawyer turned theologian named Tertullian, and he basically said, sin, that's a debt to God. So right away, you've got this legal setup, right? God is the judge, his honor has been insulted, and to balance the scales, a payment has to be made. The books have to be cleared. But this is where it gets really tricky. You're left with this picture of a loving God who, for some reason, demands a brutal, violent payment to forgive. And that leads to what some people, like the theologian J.D. Myers, have called a pretty dangerous idea, that God killed Jesus. And that's the core problem we really need to get to the bottom of. All right, let's switch gears completely. We're going to step out of theology for a second and into a totally different field, anthropology. And this is where a fascinating new clue pops up. And here it is. Our big clue comes from an anthropologist named René Girard. He spotted this pattern that's like hardwired into us. He said, look, whenever societies get into a crisis, when rivalries and tensions are about to boil over, we have this built-in reflex. To stop ourselves from tearing each other apart, we instinctively find someone to blame, a scapegoat. We pour all our collective rage onto that one person, and just like that, we get a kind of peace. Girard broke it down into this cycle. It all starts with what he called mimetic rivalry, which is a fancy way of saying we copy each other. We want what other people want, and that naturally leads to conflict. Then things escalate, chaos builds, and eventually this mob mentality takes over. The mob finds its target, and by getting rid of that victim, suddenly everyone feels united again. But it's a false peace, right? It's fragile. And this is Girard's really shocking conclusion. He basically says that human culture is founded on the corpse of the victim. Wow. He argues that so many of our myths, our religions, even our laws, are just the stories the victors, the killers, tell to convince themselves that what they did was right. They disguise their own violence as something sacred, something the gods wanted. But this is where everything changes. This is the pivot. Girard says the story of the cross is the first time in history that this founding murder story is told, but from the victim's point of view. It completely flips the script. It's not the story of the proud community celebrating their justice. It's the story of an innocent person being killed. And by telling it that way, the whole scapegoat mechanism is exposed for what it is, a violent lie. Okay, so now we have this new tool, this new lens to look through. Let's go back to the crime scene, so to speak, and re-examine the evidence. Because maybe, just maybe, the real culprit behind the violence isn't who we thought it was. Maybe the question isn't, is humanity on trial, but is God on trial? And just like that, everything gets turned on its head. The old theory says God is the executor, demanding a payment. But this new evidence? It suggests God is the victim. The cross isn't about a violent God needing to be appeased. It's about a non-violent God stepping right into our violent human machinery to become the victim, and in doing so, showing everyone just how unjust the whole system is. You know, the theologian Jürgen Moltmann put it beautifully. He said God isn't just sitting up there outside of all the suffering, pulling the strings. No, the cross is an event that happens within God. God isn't some distant, unfeeling being. God is right there in the pain, suffering with us, experiencing that feeling of being abandoned right alongside us. Just think about that for a second. On the cross, humanity is throwing its absolute worst, its ultimate violence, at God. And what does God do? God takes it all and gives back only forgiveness. It's the ultimate act of non-retaliation. It breaks the cycle. By refusing to play the game of violence, by refusing to hit back, God absorbs all our hate and reveals a kind of love that completely disarms it. So if we accept this idea that God is fundamentally non-violent, then we have a problem. What do we do with big, powerful words like justice and wrath? It seems like we have to completely rethink what they mean. Right. So justice shifts from being retributive, an eye for an eye, making someone pay for what they did, to being restorative. Restorative justice isn't about balancing the scales of pain. It's about healing. It's about fixing what's broken and putting the world back together. One thinker, Graham Maxwell, said it's all about healing our deep-seated distrust of God. And what about wrath? I think we all have this image in our heads, right? God's wrath is this active, fiery anger, like a cosmic judge just losing his temper and slamming down the gavel. But what if that's not it at all? A lot of theologians, like N.T. Wright, see it completely differently. Wrath isn't God actively lashing out. It's more like the painful, sorrowful, but totally natural consequence of us choosing to walk away from the very source of life. As Ellen Wright wrote, it's like God sorrowfully leaves the rejectors of his mercy to themselves, to reap that which they have sown. It's the pain of a lover letting go. I love this ancient metaphor from John Chrysostom, an early church father. He said God isn't a judge who's angry with criminals. He's a physician who is fighting a disease. And that just changes everything, doesn't it? Salvation isn't a legal problem to be solved, it's a medical one. Sin isn't a crime that demands punishment, it's a sickness that needs a cure.
Okay, so what does all this mean for us, right here, right now? What's the takeaway? Well, if the cross is God's great protest against violence and scapegoating, then that has huge, huge implications for how we're supposed to live.
It calls us to a totally different way of being in the world. It means we stand in solidarity with victims, with the people on the margins. It means we practice creative nonviolence. It's about overcoming evil with good. Moltmann even said this is deeply political. It means siding with the oppressed against the powerful. It's about forming what another theologian, Richard Hayes, called a countercultural community, a community that has no borders or flags and that completely rejects the world's way of using force. A community that tries to build a society that doesn't need victims to survive. So when you look at it this way, the cross didn't change God's mind about us. It was meant to change our minds about God. It wasn't about calming down an angry deity. It was the ultimate revelation of a love that was there all along. N.T. Wright puts it perfectly. Its purpose was to break our hearts and kill our enmity towards a God who was never, ever our enemy to begin with. And that leaves us with one last, really challenging thought. If the cross truly exposed this hidden human mechanism, our default setting to create unity by blaming a victim, then it forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. Who are the victims we still refuse to see? Who are the scapegoats propping up our economies, our politics, our social media, our very own communities right now?